Here. Thank you for the opportunity to preach again. Today we're going to be looking at the parable of the wedding feast in Matthew chapter 22. Great parable to teach some good lessons, and kind of a question off the bat is we all want to be welcomed and we all want to be invited to things. I think that's something that we can all relate to as Christians and as just humans in general, that we all want to be invited and accepted in different places. And it's a good thing to kind of keep in the back of our heads before we read this parable. Matthew 22 verses 1 to 14 says, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who has prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet, to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention to him and went off. One to his field, another to his business. The rest seized, and servants mistreated them and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to the servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. 'Friend,' he asked, 'how did you get in here without wedding clothes?' The man was speechless. And the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and feet and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" So with this, we kind of have to look at the study of Matthew first. It was written to a very Jewish audience at this time, and a lot of these parables in Matthew we read are kind of hard to understand in our modern day 21st century Christian Western mindset. We have to understand Jesus was a Jew, and he understood these parables as he taught these parables, but it's a great way as a whole to put our faith into application. So this particular parable is in response to Jewish leaders who were questioning his authority in chapter 21, leading up to this parable. And the Jewish people were finally realizing that Jesus wasn't the type of Messiah that they were looking for. Instead, Jesus had no plans to deliver them from the Romans, which is what they wanted to do, and oppressors, and therefore they were praising him and turned their rejection pretty rapidly and not praising him because of that. So this first word, it says, Jesus spoke to them in parables and the kingdom of heaven. So the kingdom of heaven is something that many Jews would understand in this time period. And that the kingdom of heaven is strictly reserved for them, and that no Gentile would ever enter. That was their mindset. And the Jews also in this temple where Jesus is speaking would have had many ideas of what the kingdom of heaven would look like, and the kingdom of God would look like. As there is basically a type of past, present, and future kingdom that they would be recognized with and very familiar with. And it was believed the Messiah as a whole would be welcome at this grand banquet that was given to the people, the Jewish people. So I think it's really interesting to know that the thinking of the Messiah would have been for the Jews, not the whole world. And really their gospel of this Messiah would be a gospel that would save the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. But instead, we of course know today that Jesus Christ died for all and saved all. And there's something else. Those who rejected God would be punished. God's anger, we see God's anger in this passage, and that this anger in wanting to punish those who have been justified as they ignored his first call to the wedding banquet, and that no one came. And his loss for patience was tested. I think of a passage in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, which says, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever." And there will be a day that God will no longer stand sin anymore. And there will be a day where God can no longer look at sin. And this is a kind of an eschatological event looking at that. And there's something really cool. I did a word study on this word, this next word, sending his troops to punish. Some Bibles write troops, others write armies. And it would be very unlikely in the Jewish context for a king to send a full army. To the common phrase, sending his troops would have been more appropriate during this time. And they went to the city that they're talking about, and they destroyed it, and they set it on fire. And this would also be a eschatological event looking forward to the prophecy of what Titus would talk about in the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD that was destroyed. And now we see God's judgment being explained to the herein. Here, I believe personally that first we will see the rapture. And once we are all caught up in the air, there will be a 7-year tribulation period on earth, and there will be a millennial kingdom here on earth where Jesus Christ, that will be his second coming. And now we have an unworthiness type of factor. We see that there's an unworthiness because of themselves. The Jewish people are unworthy now. But it's not because they anything of their own heart or own being, but instead it was the righteousness that they lacked. It wasn't them as a whole, it was their inner heart and their righteousness that they lacked. And that's why they were kicked out of this wedding banquet. And the invitation itself was based on the king's favor, not anything that they have done, similar to God's grace today. And God's grace today isn't given because anything we've done, but instead God's grace is given to us freely because that's in God's character. So we believe that this to be a season and that God has a plan for Israel and that the church does not replace Israel. We have two separate meanings. We have the church here and the Israel here. The church does not go hand in hand with this. And lastly, we have a replacement, and that our salvation doesn't change. Our salvation has always been by great grace through our faith. And all those who give up their sins at this dinner, all those who give up their sins will be the dinner guests at this wedding feast. Both good and evil are important because both good people and evil people who accept God's grace look righteous in his eyes. And then we see at the end here, we see this guest get kicked out, this man who was not wearing proper wedding clothes. And the guest thought he could rely on his invitation alone to get a wedding banquet. Similarly, how the religious elite in this time period that Jesus is addressing would have thought that they could rely on being God's chosen people, that they're from Israel, we're invited to the kingdom of heaven because we're God's chosen people. That's not true in this case. Instead, it's God's righteousness that gets us into heaven. It's not our DNA and our ancestry of being Israelite. It's God's grace and God's righteousness to us. And lastly, we see something very sad at the last part. We see weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I believe this will be a torment of a thing we call hell as Christians. And really, hell is a very scary place to a lot of people, but I think the scariest thing about hell is eternal separation from God. And then we see this unfold here, weeping and gnashing of teeth, and that will be why hell will be so terrible a place. But many are called, but few are chosen. That's basically like we're all called, we're all invited to the kingdom of heaven, but only a couple of us will inherit that kingdom of heaven because only a couple of us will accept God's grace. But the invitation is both for Jew and Gentile now, as we are here in this dispensation of grace. Both a Jewish person and a Gentile person can accept God's grace and God's righteousness today. And I think that's the greatest thing we can apply to our lives here in 2019. And thank you for this message. I hope you're able to get some insight about God and just his righteousness, and that just this parable does a great illustration.